In 2018, the film Gotti, directed by Kevin Connolly, was released. The film documents the life of John Gotti, famous New York gangster. John Gotti led quite the fascinating life, rising from a childhood of poverty and executing hits to eventually become the head of the Gambino crime family. Despite being a criminal, his charismatic personality led to him being beloved by a good amount of the general population. Gotti was known as the mobster who wasn't afraid to smile and wave at the cameras, and you'd think that this personality, combined with his tumultuous life, would make for an easy cinematic success. Well, this did not happen, with the 2018 Gotti film completely failing to not only portray Gotti's life in an interesting way, but also completely failing to be a competent film. To this day, the film has a 0% critic rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with the audience rating also reflecting negative sentiment. In fact, it's contested if the audience score is even accurate, as people have theorized that there were a bunch of positive audience reviews planted by the studio behind Gotti. Despite being a more obscure film that not many people watched, Gotti had the same number of audience reviews as bigger films. Additionally, many of the reviewers giving Gotti positive scores only reviewed Gotti and did not have reviews for any other films. Very suspicious. To this day, Gotti is a huge joke among the film community, with people invoking its name whenever needing an example of a horrible movie. It's basically Morbius years before Morbius came out. However, there are many bad movies being released all the time. Why am I singling out Gotti? The answer to that question comes with their marketing campaign. You see, when initial critic reviews came out, the studios behind Gotti started to go into panic mode when all of them came back negative. So they created a now infamous ad campaign saying that while critics gave the film low scores, audiences actually loved it. The marketing team started to whip up a narrative that the critics were all working together to prevent you from watching the film. They also discredited critics, painting them as out-of-touch snobs, and that you should trust your fellow audience members more than them. Critics put out the hit. Who would you trust more, yourself or a troll behind a keyboard? Of course, this ad campaign was universally panned, with people laughing at how ridiculous this notion was. However, it seems like in just a few short years, this sentiment would become widespread in film discussion. This video was initially going to be a general list of the best and worst movies I watched in 2023. However, I realized that for most of the movies on the list, both good and bad, I wasn't going to say anything that other people haven't said before. However, there were two films that I considered among the worst of 2023 that I not only had a unique perspective on, but also had an interesting through-line connecting them. These two movies are the Super Mario Bros. Movie and the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. Now, I am not the first to criticize these two films, but I did find it interesting that after negative critical reception, it seems like fans of those movies went on a personal vendetta against the critics. Now, I'm not saying that people need to agree with the critics. It is perfectly fine to enjoy these movies since everyone is looking for something different from their films. However, what baffles me is how offended people got at the critics' scores. It's one thing to disagree with critics. I myself disagree with critics on many movies, games, and shows. However, if you disagree with the critics, just move on. Why do you need to care so much about it? But no, people can't just accept that there are differing opinions on flawed movies, but they feel the need to disprove the critics, either through rebutting their points or through personal attacks. So today I want to investigate this phenomenon. I'll take a look at the two films and see if critics really are too harsh on them, or if they just don't get it. Then we'll look at fan reaction to critics as well as their criticism to critics. So first, let's start off with my reviews of Mario Bros. And Five Nights at Freddy's. And just to give my background, I would consider myself someone familiar with these two franchises, at least more familiar than the average moviegoer. Of course, I've been playing Mario games since I was a child, playing Mario Kart and a bunch of the 3D Mario games. Additionally, I've spent a lot of time watching Mario-related videos on YouTube, so yeah, definitely someone who knows his Mario stuff. Also, while I don't really care about Five Nights at Freddy's anymore, I used to be a pretty big fan around the beginning of the series' lifespan, from around 2014 to 2016. Like, I was pretty invested in the series from the first game, and I played everything up to and including Sister Location. And of course, a huge part of my enjoyment of the series came from the lore, especially those MatPat videos. I was watching his FNAF lore from the very day he uploaded his first video on the series, and I kept up with it until Sister Location. To say that I loved these videos is an understatement. I mean, you just need to take a look at my channel to see how Game Theory's lore videos had an impact on me. and while I don't actively keep up with FNAF now, I'm generally aware of what's going on since I do still watch some more recent videos about the franchise. So yeah, I was a huge fan of FNAF back when most current fans of FNAF were in diapers. So I'm explaining all this to say that I'm not some out-of-touch boomer critic. I am someone who's familiar with these games, had wonderful childhood memories with them, and is well equipped to appreciate these films as a fan. So let's talk about the movies themselves. We'll start off with the Super Mario Bros. Movie. This movie had one of the most interesting marketing campaigns I can think of in the recent years. It had been known for a while that Illumination was working on a Mario movie, and people were worried that they would drop the ball. These worries were exacerbated by the infamous cast reveal when, to the world's horror, Chris Pratt was revealed as the voice of Mario. Now, people got offended because they replaced Charles Martinet for the role. Charles Martinet was the guy who voice acted Mario in the games from the 90s to very recently. To many, he is the voice of Mario, but honestly, he's a good voice only for these isolated voice clips of the games. The full movie with that voice would be kind of unbearable. I mean, there's a reason why he has very few notable roles outside Mario. The only one most know about is him playing the Senator in the Stardust Crusaders OVA, and he's not exactly the best in that.
We can't! You knocked out my driver! Well, if you're in a hurry, and I don't mean to offend you, please take this and you can hail a taxi. Oh!
Shut up.
In the final movie, I will say Chris Pratt's slight New York accent does work better. Other than that, the other voice acting choices were funny, with the most notable being Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong and Jack Black as Bowser. As the months went on, we got more promotional material. The poster for the film came out, and I was genuinely impressed. It kept all the color and wackiness of the game Mario. Mario as a franchise is just kind of unironically insane, and I'm genuinely glad the movie embraced the world's insanity instead of trying to tone it down or justify it. However, as the trailers for the movie released, my already minimal enthusiasm for the film diminished. There was nothing shown in the trailers that made me want to see the film. It was just a bunch of nothing burgers, only made notable by references to the franchise before it. The only value the movie is showing to me is that it has Mario stuff in it. But enough of the marketing. What did I think of the movie? Well, let's do a brief rundown of the plot. Mario and Luigi are brothers living in Brooklyn who start a plumbing business despite facing resistance from peers in their own family. However, they still go through with their business and actually get their first call. They head over to their client's home, and there's actually this fun sequence where Mario's platforming through Brooklyn, and it's shot to look like a level of the 2D games, ending with him sliding down the flagpole and all. I thought that was neat. Later that night, they try to mess with some other pipes and get sucked into a wormhole. Luigi is sent to the Darklands where he is captured by Bowser, while Mario is sent to the Mushroom Kingdom where he meets Toad. Toad takes him to see Princess Peach, who's just kind of glad she found another human. She catches him up with the unfolding crisis, as Bowser is planning to take over the world. We cut back to Bowser, who interrogates Luigi and sends him to prison. It's then revealed that Bowser's main motivation isn't really taking over the world, but rather marrying Peach. I actually like this characterization. It fits with the games, and seeing Bowser only worried about impressing Peach while his army is concerned with the conquest is amusing. However, after this we kind of lose the plot. Mario goes through some training, they go to the Kong Kingdom, there's another fight there with Kong to prove Mario's worth, and then they all get into Mario Karts to fight Bowser. I do think the shift in tone in the Mario Kart segment was jarring though. We spent the entire film building up Mario as a hero, so for him to do this right after was strange.
Faster.
Yes, sir.
Mario and Kong are seemingly killed and separated from the rest of the group. The Kongs are captured, and Peach and Toad go back to the Mushroom Kingdom, where Peach agrees to marry Bowser if he doesn't harm anyone else. The wedding is on, and despite the promise, Bowser intends to ritually sacrifice all of his prisoners, including Luigi and the Kongs, to bless the wedding. But Mario and Donkey Kong survive and work together to reach the Mushroom Kingdom. They fight Bowser, and stuff happens, and the fight makes its way to Brooklyn. Mario is almost defeated and has a realistic depiction of a panic attack, but Luigi helps him, they get the superstar and beat Bowser, and the day is saved. I really wish there was more cohesion to the plot. There are individual set pieces and scenes that work, but there's really nothing holding them together beyond the loosest narrative. While watching the movie, I was thinking that it would have been better if the best scenes of the movies were just uploaded to Nintendo's YouTube channel or something as short interconnected Mario films, since the rest of the movie doesn't really add much. I know there are people online who say that the Mario games have little story, which is why it's okay for the movie to be the same, but I'm not playing the game, I'm watching a movie. I don't care if the games aren't story focused because I'm focused on the puzzles, platforming, and exploration. The story in the games is just a justification to tie together the gameplay, but there's no gameplay in a movie, which is why I want them to flesh out the stories and characters to make this film more watchable. Speaking of characters, they were also similarly blank. The closest thing we get to an arc is Mario and Donkey Kong learning to work together and eventually gaining the respect of their respective families. However, this is extremely bare bones and not even fleshed out well. Characters like Luigi, Toad, and Peach were all just complete nothing burgers. Luigi is the entire driving motivation for Mario in the movie, and we don't really know anything about him except for the fact that he's Mario's brother, which to be fair fits with him being sidelined by Mario in the games, but I'd at least want something more to give Mario motivation. I think contrasting personalities between Mario and Luigi could have worked well, with Mario being jaded and pessimistic while Luigi is cheerful and optimistic. Despite their differences, they still love each other. When they get separated, Luigi remains optimistic that Mario will come to save him, and defies Bowser by openly telling him how great Mario is. Meanwhile, Mario, on his journey to find Luigi, has to cope with not having that other optimistic half to deal with his cynical thoughts, and needs to develop to become more hopeful himself, learning from his brother in his absence. Toad could have also had an arc where he's desperate to prove himself as a warrior and explorer instead of someone meek like the other Toads. This is how he's characterized in the movie, but there's no development of it. He's just kind of accepted from the beginning and remains a static comedic character throughout the film. If there was a side arc of him not being taken seriously by Mario or Peach at the beginning, but eventually earning their respect with his bravery through the film, culminating in him bravely joining the fight against Bowser at the end, that could also be a satisfying direction for the character. Peach could have an arc too, starting off the movie as a super serious and stoic princess, burdened by a responsibility her entire life. But during the course of the film, she learns to lighten up and have fun, think outside the box. This new perspective helps her win the fight against Bowser in the end. These are the most basic storylines for the characters I came up with in like a minute, but the movie doesn't even bother to include something of that caliber. The only character that was enjoyable to watch was Bowser. Like I said before, his obsession with Peach, basically every scene he's in is pretty great, and it was shown well. I enjoyed every scene with Bowser, except, strangely, the Peaches song, which just felt so unnecessary and unfunny. It's like they got Jack Black to sit in front of the mic and just went, "Hey, sing a song about Peach," and they took the literal first draft and ran with it. But other than that, he was great in the film, and Jack Black actually felt like he tried to imbue emotion into the character. I cannot say the same for the rest of the voice actors, who had incredibly mediocre performances, very phoned in. The sequences and dialogue were also pretty bland and predictable. The action scenes were mostly uninteresting. It's a shame because Mario is known for having a bunch of unique settings and enemies, which you would think could lead to some cool fight scenes when fully choreographed for the big screen. But they did not utilize the variety of options they had at their disposal. There was only one action scene in the movie which I did enjoy, and that was one near the end where Mario and Donkey Kong are fighting their way to the top of the Mushroom Kingdom. That had a lot of energy and momentum to it, and it used the environment and the choreography well. But other than that, I don't think any of the action scenes were notable, which is sad because I at least want to see fun fights in a Mario movie. There was also no enjoyment or interest in most of the speaking scenes. The dialogue was just so bad. Most of the jokes were also horrible, especially the running gag with the Lumen. The joke here is that this cute little star thing is incredibly depressed and openly wishes for death, with a lot of edgy one-liners. Now, the first time I saw this, it was funny. I actually smiled when it said that the only escape was death, and everyone else in the prison started objecting. But they keep milking this one joke, and it quickly became old. The novelty wore off, and I started to become annoyed with it. And to rub salt in this injury, when the film ends, they decided to give this thing a monologue where it talks about how everything is over now, and only darkness awaits us if we remain. I kid you not, my face watching that was like that one scene of Homelander in the movie theater. The fact that they dragged out what could have been a funny one-off makes me think of corporate involvement. I mean, we are talking about Illumination here. They already got the boomers and Gen Xers hooked with the Minions. I guess this was the company's attempt of making a new, cute, marketable character that appealed to the millennial and Gen Z semi-ironic doomer humor. I don't see any other explanation. There were only like 2 gags in the movie that I laughed out loud at, and they were both visual gags. The first was Bowser setting a Koopa on fire, turning it into dry bones, and the second was the King Bob-omb getting lit on fire and unsuccessfully trying to stop himself from blowing up. I think those are legitimately funny parts of the movie, and I still find them funny, because there were more subtle visual jokes, and they weren't dragged out. It felt like an actual writer making the joke, not a boardroom. But speaking of corporate involvement, we have the soundtrack. Now, for the most part, the remasters of the Mario game songs were pretty great. I really enjoyed the small nods to the DK rap. Most of it was a bit too orchestral for my taste though. I wish they had went for something a bit more similar to the sound font of the games. But that's not egregious, the licensed music was. I think there were like around 5 times licensed tracks were used, and all of them were the most obvious and bland songs to use in that situation. I remember Holding Out for a Hero, Thunderstruck, Take On Me, and Mr. Blue Sky, and those are probably like the 4 most basic songs to use in a movie. Half of them aren't even from the 80s, surely there were other 80s songs that were better fitting for the film scenes. That Take On Me scene was especially bad. It just felt like they plopped that song into the scene without taking into consideration if it fit it, which it didn't at all. But once again, this is another staple of Illumination. Just take popular songs and put them in your movie without second thought. I mean, they made 2 entire movies specifically for this purpose. I guess the last thing I have to talk about are the visuals, and I don't really have any complaints here. The Brooklyn scenes felt very Illumination-esque, but as soon as it got to the fantastical kingdoms, it looked great. Regardless of your other thoughts on Illumination, their animation is at the very least polished, and if you combine that with the interesting and unique designs in the Mario world, you get some truly fantastic visuals. So yeah, that is basically my review of the Mario movie. I will say I enjoyed it more than I initially expected, but that just goes to show how incredibly low my expectations were, as I still consider it one of the worst films of 2023. It was just so bland, corporate, and uninspired. The only good parts of the movie, the parts that were at least unique and creative, were elements that were already present in the Mario games. The movie didn't feel like they took the concept of Mario and creatively adapted it to the big screen, fleshing out the story in the background of the games while also calling back to the source material with references for the fans. References are not inherently bad, especially in a video game movie like Mario, but if that's all the movie has, that's when it becomes a problem. This movie feels like Illumination went like, it's a Mario movie, it'll be successful no matter what. Let's just try and make it as bland and widely appealing as possible. That's my problem with the movie. The movie doesn't feel like an artistic endeavor to honor the impact and memories the Mario franchise has made, but rather just a bland corporate ploy to make as much money as possible, and it seems to have worked. Let's pivot to the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. This film released in October 2023, just in time for Halloween. The movie was actually in production for quite a long time, like over 5 years if I remember correctly. It was produced by Blumhouse Productions. Their whole gimmick is making low-budget movies that give more freedom to the creatives. And that has resulted in quite the volatile roster. Like, they've produced some truly fantastic movies, but those tend to be a minority. And for the most part, they're the guys who make the really cheesy and bland horror movies. And with that in mind, it's no wonder why they greenlit Five Nights at Freddy's. Compared to other video games, FNAF does not require high-budget set pieces and action sequences to properly replicate. All the games take place in a singular location, often being an ordinary-looking pizzeria. They don't feature a lot of action. In fact, in the first one, the entirety of the gameplay is just you sitting at a desk. The only thing that is somewhat challenging, at least visually, to replicate would be the animatronics. And I'll share my thoughts on them later. But yeah, with such a low cost of production and such a well-known brand and dedicated fan base, a Five Nights at Freddy's movie would have been a massive success regardless of its quality. I mean, it had a budget of $20 million and made around $300 million at the box office. That is some insane return. However, I felt like the people working on the movie knew that it would be successful, so they didn't try at all to actually adapt the game to the big screen. I find it hard to believe that this is the final script they decided to go with after 6 years of writing. The entire movie felt less like they wanted to make it, and more like they just wanted to get it out of production hell and release the movie to get it over with. You see, with the game itself being so sparse on plot, you would want to create a concise, character-driven movie that refers to bits and pieces of the lore of the FNAF games. Yeah, so I do want to take some time to just talk about the FNAF lore. I don't think the movie should be perfectly accurate to it, as it was always convoluted and open to change. However, it is community driven, and it's what the franchise is known best for. While the games may struggle to keep a coherent, easy to understand storyline, the movie had a chance to fix that and take elements from this existing lore and create a more streamlined background for the story. However, the movie shouldn't just be about the lore. Lore is cool and all, but when it comes to the plot for a movie, that has to be driven by characters and actions. Lore is not what should be front and center, it's the foundation to build stories of characters upon. This is my biggest gripe with the FNAF movie. While it does keep a similar premise to the original games and has fun references to the lore sprinkled in, it fails to build a good story on top of that. The movie is Five Nights at Freddy's, but it's not much more. Let's get into the plot of the film. The movie opens with an actually fun sequence of a security guard being chased down and killed by the animatronics. I thought this was actually a strong opening. It's a thrilling cold open, and if I was younger, I would be a little scared watching this. When I first watched the movie, this sequence followed by an atmospheric opening credits made me wonder, this may actually be better than expected. The movie then follows Mike Schmidt, played by Josh Hutcherson. He is a security guard at a mall and beats up a dude for thinking he was a kidnapper, but turns out he wasn't, and of course he gets fired from his position. This isn't good for him since he needs to take care of his younger sister Abby, and if he fails to hold a job, he'll lose custody of her to his aunt, who neither Mike nor Abby like. So a desperate Mike finds another security gig at the abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. While interviewing with the manager Steve Raglan, played by Matthew Lillard, it seems that both Raglan and the job are super sketchy, but Mike needs the position, so he goes for it. Now, this isn't a bad premise to start off the movie. However, it does go completely downhill from here. Like, it's just a super boring blur of nothing happening. Mike spends most of the time sleeping and having these dreams. I guess this is them trying to characterize him and connect him with the plot. He has these repetitive dreams about his younger brother being kidnapped when he was a kid. It's in a location completely unrelated to the plot, just some random camp in the forest. And beyond characterizing Mike's protective attitude towards Abby, it doesn't actually connect to the story until a convoluted reveal at the end where the main bad guy of the movie just so happens to be the kidnapper and murderer of his brother. What should have just been a 30-second flashback to characterize Mike gets repeated and dragged out constantly, where we learn nothing new, and then they just shove in the ghost kids into his dream at the end for no reason other than that they needed some way to further the plot. It's completely nonsensical. Another thing I found strange about the movie is that there was no allusion whatsoever to the classic gameplay of the original. Like, we never see Mike trying to fend off the animatronics by using the cameras and closing the doors. I'm not saying that half the movie should just be replicating the gameplay of the Five Nights, but even one scene would have been enough, make it a climax of the movie or something. So yeah, what should be a thrilling horror experience about trying to stay up and survive at night is somehow turned into something so boring that it not only puts me to sleep, but also the main character in the movie to sleep. As the days go by, there's a B-plot with the aunt. The aunt is in cahoots with Abby's babysitter, and hatches the plan to get Mike fired by telling the babysitter and her friends to break into the Fazbear location and bust up the place. This plan is dumb since they're seemingly destroying the place when Mike isn't even on shift, so why would he be punished? But yeah, after the babysitter and her friends break in, they're all killed by the animatronics. So now, assuming his babysitter just went missing, Mike needs to take Abby with him to his job since he doesn't want to leave her at home alone. And despite the fact that he now also has to take care of his sister, Mike still spends the night sleeping. Way to prove that you're responsible enough to keep her in your custody, Mike. And then, of course, Abby befriends the animatronics while Mike's off sleeping, and then they come across Vanessa, a cop who's just kind of there for most of the movie. They all become friends with the animatronics, and then they make a pillow fort together, and it's all happy. Then Vanessa tells Mike out of the blue to not bring Abby back or she'll shoot him, which is just completely baffling. So the next day he leaves Abby with his aunt and goes to work. He has a dream where the ghost kids randomly show up and tell him that he can be with his dead younger brother if they're allowed to kill Abby, which is just a horrible deal all around, and Mike refuses. So the ghosts get angry and attack him through the animatronic suits, and he almost dies and passes out, but is saved by Vanessa, who takes him to another location. She then lore dumps everything in one scene, revealing herself to be the daughter of William Afton, the man who murdered all the children and hid their bodies in the animatronics. Meanwhile, another animatronic Golden Freddy somehow shows somehow shows up out of nowhere and appears in Mike's aunt's apartment and kills her and convinces Abby to go with him to the pizzeria. Mike realizes Abby must be in trouble and rushes to Freddy's to try and save her. The animatronics try to shove her into what I think is a Circus Baby Springlock suit, since Abby's counterpart in the games is killed inside of a Circus Baby animatronic. But Mike shows up with some tasers and deactivates them. But then Springtrap the Yellow Rabbit shows up and reveals himself to be Steve Raglan, which is just an alias for his real identity, William Afton. He goes off on some evil monologue and tries to kill Mike and Vanessa. The animatronics fight for him until Abby makes a crayon drawing showing the Yellow Rabbit killing the kids. And I'm not making this up, that's all it takes for the animatronics to turn against Afton. Afton yells for a bit, but then the animatronics attack him, leading to the suit undergoing springlock failure, meaning all the metal bits inside of it pierce his body, killing him. The animatronics take him to a closet and lock him in there as Vanessa, Abby, and Mike make their way out of the pizzeria, which is collapsing now for some reason. Cue a couple minutes of falling action, and then the movie ends. So yeah, the reason why I explained all this to you is just to show how atrocious this writing is. This movie failed so badly at writing characters, stakes, action, build-up, payoff, everything. It makes the Mario movie look like it should win Oscar for Best Screenplay in comparison. I have no clue how they messed up this badly. Like, this isn't a bland corporate script, it's just a bad script, period. There's basically no overarching plot to the movie beyond, yep, this is Five Nights at Freddy's. Like, how hard would it have been to make a basic plot of a security guard uncovering a cold case about some child murders that happened at his workplace? But instead, it looks like they had an idea of where to go with it and just failed at the execution horribly. Like, let's take a closer look at the characters. We have Mike, a traumatized security guard who is overprotective of his sister due to what happened to his brother. We have Vanessa, a cop who struggles with how controlling and abusive her father was during her childhood. We have Abby, who's just meant to be someone for Mike to fight for, and also someone for the target audience of children to relate to. And we have Afton, the serial killer himself. Abby is already such a simple character, so she fulfills her role fine. Mike is such a boring character, he has no agency and does nothing to drive the plot forward. He had a good start as this kind of crazy but well-meaning dude, but the rest of the movie he just does nothing. Nothing. Everything happens to him, and he learns nothing for himself. It just comes to him in a dream, or Vanessa explains everything to him. If your protagonist is spending most of the movie sleeping, you have really gone wrong somewhere. Vanessa is just a lore-dump character. She had the potential to be an interesting manipulative character who would later be revealed to be manipulated herself, like a fake-out villain. But nope, she's just the one to tell Mike everything about the mystery and what he needs to do, since the movie apparently doesn't want him to actually figure out the mystery for himself and have agency. And we finally have Afton, which is such a waste of the main villain. He only shows up in 2 scenes in the movie, one being his introduction in the job interview and one being the final boss. There is no build-up, no slowly creeping confirmation that he's the villain. Vanessa just tells us he is. Like, I'm pretty sure the goddamn comic relief lawyer had more screen presence than him before the final battle. Maybe he should have been the final villain. He should have showed up more often throughout the movie, acting like he's being a good boss by checking in on Mike, but in reality he was just watching him and Abby. And he actually should have had an active role in kicking off the final conflict. Like, in the current script, he just shows up at the ending for no reason whatsoever. And by fixing these characters, you could have naturally made a much better movie with little effort. But no, I guess they just wanted to make all of them as boring as possible for some reason. Let's talk about the more technical aspects of the movie. The acting was not great, but I don't blame it on the actors. I'd never say a child actor deserves to be criticized, and I do think that even the adult actors are not to blame. Both Josh Hutcherson and Matthew Lillard have decades of acting experience under their belts, and while neither of them are particularly standout fantastic, they do have good performances in their filmography. It seems to me that the poor performances were just due to a lack of proper direction and the crew not really caring during filming, not wanting to spend time filming more takes. Several times throughout this movie, I was asking myself, was that really the best take you had? One example is a specific dialogue from the aunt, where she says the line, "Well, that went well." She kind of tripped over her words in her delivery, possibly because it was awkward having 2 wells too close to each other in a sentence. I know, I stumble over my words exactly like that when I'm reading my scripts, but usually I go back and re-record that line, maybe change it up a bit to make it less awkward. But it seems like the people making the movie didn't even care about doing that, so that made it into the final cut. The cinematography and editing was extremely boring. The camera shots we got were all the most basic and static shots you could do. I'm not sure if the static camera work was like a meta reference to the use of security cameras in the games, but man, in some scenes using actual security camera-like footage would have been a fun creative choice at the very least. The editing and framing was the most basic it could get. I know this may seem like I'm criticizing the movie way too much, but in my opinion the lack of technical creativity is also a contributing factor to how boring and sluggish the movie felt. Sure, the pacing and writing itself could be slow, but if the movie had interesting blocking and editing choices, I could at least be entertained by the visuals. Dynamic camera and dynamic editing would make the movie flow better. Like, there were a couple shots that I thought had interesting camera work, and they stood out compared to the rest of the movie. They were back to back, with one shot being the camera zooming in on the Freddy Fazbear sign, eventually zooming into a space between the letters. Then it transitions into another shot with the space between the letters becoming a doorway, which we see Vanessa standing in. I thought that was cool. And right after we get a shot of her looking at the crayon drawings, and this shot utilizes a reverse dolly zoom, with the drawings in front of Vanessa seemingly getting bigger as she looks at them. You can see this technique used a lot, especially in scenes where a character is being overwhelmed by the information they need to come to terms with. It's a visual way to show that a character's mindset has been turned on its head, that they are distressed mentally. Using it in this Five Nights at Freddy's shot turns it from just a mundane scene of her looking at drawings to a scene where we understand that these pictures, or the stories behind them, have mentally burdened Vanessa in some way. It conveys information without explicitly saying it out loud. This is legitimately great stuff. Now, I don't know if they got someone competent to only do this one sequence because it's such an outlier compared to how bland the rest of the movie is shot and edited. But yeah, I wish more of the scenes in the movie were visually interesting like these. I would have enjoyed them much more. There's a reason why this stuff matters in filmmaking. And speaking of the more visual aspects of the movie, I come to the animatronics. Now, these giant props were created by Jim Henson's Creature Shop, who have done great work in the past. It's certainly better than fully CGIing the animatronics, and even if they did use CGI animatronics for some sequences, it's good that the visual effects artists had an actual physical model to base their effects on. However, what I'm not happy about is how these animatronics are utilized in the movie. I feel like they completely missed the mark on how these animatronics should be shown. I know that there's some subsets of the FNAF community who seem to be disappointed that the designs didn't go full horror, and that the animatronics look too babyish and friendly, but this isn't the issue at all. Yeah, of course the animatronics aren't gonna look like demons, they're animatronics in a children's entertainment installation. They're supposed to be friendly and inviting, yet somewhat unsettling. That's literally the basic idea that inspired the whole franchise in the beginning. The original FNAF animatronics were like this. They were unsettling, but looking at them head on, they weren't outright scary. However, what made these animatronics scary in the original game were the way that they were utilized in the environment. First of all, we were almost always seeing them through these grainy cameras, which obscure the subjects and hide some of the detail. Additionally, the animatronics were almost always bathed in shadow. They were never fully lit. The shadows would also highlight some of their scarier features, such as providing contrast to their eyes. So you never actually got a good look at them, which made them scarier in your head. Additionally, you never actually see them move around. They just seemingly jump from position to position. This leaves more to the imagination, making them scarier. There are only 2 times you see animatronics moving. One is Foxy running down the hall, which is basically a mini jumpscare on its own, being a shocking explosion of movement to break up mostly static gameplay. And also, when you see that, you're usually scrambling to close the door. The other time you see animatronics moving are in the jump scares, and while you do see them up front and moving, it's so quick and jarring that you're going to be startled. What I mean to say here is that the original game does a good job at making these children's animatronics scary. The film does none of that. They don't even attempt to utilize lighting to make the animatronics look more interesting. You basically always see them underneath good lighting, removing any mystery or suspense regarding them. You also see them moving all the time, and they're always moving in these slow, clunky movements. Any threat or suspense that could have been invoked by the animatronics is just gone, leaving them to look really goofy. I know that the movie can't be as restrained with the animatronics as the first game, but the fact that the filmmakers didn't even make an attempt to replicate what made them scary in the games just goes to show how little effort was put in the film. And here we come back to the same conclusion. The production company likely did not care about actually making a quality film. They just knew that making a movie called Five Nights at Freddy's would be financially successful no matter what, and that people would defend it just because it's part of a franchise they enjoy. And now we get to the attacks on the critics. Once again, I do want to reiterate that a critic's opinion is not the objective truth, and you can choose to ignore them if you want. But what I don't like is people outright attacking them or trying to dismiss their opinions as not genuine or irrelevant because you don't like them. I see like 3 major reasons for attacks against critics being circulated on the internet, so I do want to dispute them. So first we have what I think is the most legitimate critique, which is that critics don't understand the franchise and community behind the movie, and as such cannot appreciate the movie as well. I do agree with this to an extent. If you're already a fan of these franchises, you would be a lot more appreciative of the movie, and naturally a lot more defensive surrounding its flaws. This isn't a bad thing at all. I'll usually act the same for some of the stuff that I enjoy. However, even if you're a fan, it's important for you to acknowledge the flaws and stuff that you like, and accept other people pointing out these flaws. And also, you have to remember that critics will have to bring some level of objectivity to what they're reviewing. And more importantly, they're reviewing the movie as an individual product in a vacuum, not as part of a larger franchise. They would ideally be judging the movie objectively, not subjectively. This means they're more concerned with the movie's technical competency, such as if there's a strong artistic vision, if the movie looks good, and if the writing is good. They don't place importance on stuff like Easter eggs. The context of the wider community and franchise should not be used to make up for the flaws of that individual movie. This is an important perspective to keep in mind, and this also leads to a natural conclusion that is important to keep in mind. Since critics view movies much more objectively, their consensus tends to be a lot more middle of the road than the general audience reviews, since they try and see the good and the bad in all of the movies, and thus come out with scores usually closer to 5 out of 10s. On the other hand, audiences really only bother rating movies if they really liked or disliked them, so their scores usually average out to close to a 0 or 100. And to be honest, if you ever actually look at the written reviews by audience members on sites like Rotten Tomatoes, the reviews usually say absolutely nothing, either just really subjective thoughts or complete nonsense. So yeah, you should take critic reviews with a grain of salt, but you should honestly be even more skeptical of numerical audience ratings. Focus more on people actually discussing the movie instead of just pure numbers. A more specific accusation I see against critics is that they rated the film Cuties at 86% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now listen, I don't want to get into a whole discussion about the movie here. I haven't watched it, but I do think the fact that they actually directed child actors to act out some of the scenes in that movie is disgusting. With that being said, I also do think it is extremely ridiculous to use critic reactions to this movie as some sort of gotcha against all critics. The idea people are spreading is that critics are all part of this one big united Hollywood elite, and that they're all predators who work together to promote child exploitation through movies. Well, first of all, the idea that critics are just this one big hive mind all working for the rich of Hollywood is just wrong. They all work for different publications, and some are even just people with YouTube channels or podcasts. Also, in the specific case of Cutie, there are only 81 critic reviews, which is not a lot compared to the amount of reviews the more popular movies get. The idea that this group of 81 represents all critics and all of the movie industry is dumb. It's not like the same batch of reviewers are reviewing every single movie, so to use the opinions of the reviewers of this movie to discredit reviews of other movies is disingenuous. Also, if you actually take a look at the actual reviewers, you would see that some of the biggest publications, including the literal Hollywood Reporter, gave Cuties a negative score. That kind of throws this whole conspiracy out the window. And the worst part about this entire argument is how selective people are with using it. Like, it's only used whenever you disagree with critics, yet people conveniently stay silent whenever they agree with them. If you do agree that this review score is a moral failure representative of all critics, then you could use it to argue against any critical reception. Oh, what's that? Critics gave Madam Web a 12% on Rotten Tomatoes? Well, those guys gave Cuties an 86%. Don't listen to them. Madam Web is actually good. Or in another case, critics gave Oppenheimer a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, but they also rated Cuties positively, so I'm not going to believe them. Oppenheimer has to be a bad movie if critics like it. You see how disingenuous and dumb this argument is? Once again, I'm not defending the movie itself, I'm pointing out why using critical reception of that movie as an argument against critics as a whole is not a valid argument. And the final argument I'm going to rebuke is that critics only like stuck-up, artistic, and inaccessible movies, and that they look down on the more fun movies the general audience likes. There's a general belief that anyone who's into film and analyzing film really hate any sort of fun movie. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen the meme that film bros would rather watch a 4-hour black and white movie about the Serbian government through the eyes of a pigeon than a Marvel movie. This is simply not the case. Well, not the pigeon movie part, that movie sounds sick. But a lot of people who enjoy film as art can also enjoy fun movies for what they are. A lot of us don't judge all movies on the same scale. We know that different movies have different intents and audiences, and we judge and enjoy it based on that. For example, I know that the Fast and Furious movies, especially the more recent ones, are just objectively bad movies. However, I do get a lot of subjective enjoyment from these films, liking the ridiculous scenarios the characters get into. Also, let's just take a look at the Spy Kids Rotten Tomatoes score. Yeah, not what you were expecting, right? Spy Kids is now a beloved children's movie, yet this seems to show that critics almost unanimously love it, while audiences are split 50-50 on it. And this Reddit comment by the user Tojiro about this matter sums up my thoughts pretty well. Reviews are subjective and contextual. In other words, Spy Kids may be a great kids movie. The sum of its rating score doesn't make it the greatest film ever, just good relative to other films in the genre. It would be ridiculous to compare every movie with Citizen Kane or Barney's Adventure. There's still something to be said about the data aggregate that Metacritic or Rotten Tomatoes provides, but it's not some sort of universal metric of a movie's worth. Now, regardless whether or not you think Spy Kids deserves that score, you have to agree that this just destroys the notion that critics don't like any dumb fun movie, and the commenter has a point. No actual critic was expecting the Mario movie or FNAF to be this generation's Citizen Kane, but instead they were rather comparing it to other movies which were meant for a similar audience. And compared to other children's animated movies or other B-horror movies, the objective aspects of these movies do not hold up. Their quality ranges from bland to nonsensical, and neither of them are interesting or unique enough to justify a better rating. These movies just aren't that good, I'm sorry to say it. So, why do I care? You're allowed to enjoy anything you want. You're allowed to enjoy these movies, and I don't want to make you feel bad for doing so. I know, I'm a big fan of Pokemon, and I enjoy their games, even the newer ones. However, I'm not deluding myself into believing that they are great games. They have a lot of potential, but the execution just failed so badly that it's unacceptable, especially from a franchise as big as Pokemon, and I will be the first one to critique the issues of these games. Similarly, you also shouldn't try to justify these mediocre movies as being objectively good, and then attack anyone who doesn't agree with you. And the reason why this matters is because I want people to start demanding more of their movies. To not be afraid to critique something, even if they like it. Because I'm starting to see a trend where studios are realizing that all you really need to do to make a successful project is to just base it off a current IP, since they know fans will just come out to watch and defend it. They don't actually have to try with making a good product, just throw in a couple references and you're golden. And the fact that people still go out to support and defend these projects are only emboldening the studios to continue this behavior. Like, Sony announced a live-action Legend of Zelda movie, and I'm already seeing the same pattern of the Mario movie repeating. Sure, people are riffing on how ridiculous the concept is, and I'm sure once casting is announced, we'll see a lot of jokes making fun of it. But then we'll start getting posters and trailers, and people will see a live-action Navi, a background reference to Majora's Mask, and hear an orchestral rendition of the title theme, and suddenly, regardless of how bad the movie itself actually is, it'll automatically be considered a love letter to the fans, and people will say, yeah, it's not the best, but it's Zelda, so it's good enough for me. I think an interesting point of conversation is the recent live-action Last Airbender Netflix show. While I'd expect a similar response to the stuff we already talked about, it looks like the community is actually coming together and critiquing the show for its major flaws. There is a lot more I have to say about this, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to say that I'm glad people aren't just accepting the fan service of the Netflix show and are actually criticizing the acting, writing, etc., since they do need to be severely criticized. I also still think that the reception is a bit too friendly, but compared to other fandoms, this is a great response, and more importantly, this response from the community may actually prompt the showrunners to improve these aspects in the next 2 seasons of the show. Or not, since all they care about is viewership and money, but one can hope. I think this is because the Avatar fandom likes the original show because of its writing and characterization, more so than the visuals of the show. So when the remake came out, they were a lot more willing to criticize those aspects, especially compared to the Mario and FNAF movies, whose source material wasn't exactly known for storytelling or characters. Also, the Avatar fandom already had experience with a really bad adaptation, so I'm thinking they went into the Netflix show with a lot more skepticism. Or it could have also had the opposite effect, where people are like, hey, at least it's not as bad as a Shyamalan movie, a statement which should not be considered praise because it should just be the expectation of any piece of media ever. But yeah, Avatar fandom, good job on actually pushing back on the remake and demanding more from it, and I hope that other fandoms follow suit. The thing is, I don't want any of these movies to fail. I'm a fan of all these properties. I want the Mario movie to be good. I want the FNAF movie to be good. I want the Netflix Avatar to be good. I want the future Zelda movie to be good. But in order to ensure the quality of our media, we have to demand it and stop accepting mediocrity. Because if we don't, studios will just keep lowering and lowering the quality of content they put out, seeing how much they can cut corners while still being successful. So let's make sure this doesn't happen. Let's all be a little more critical of the media we consume. This is Ryvecha, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video.